In the vast silence of the cosmos, there is a story unlike any other, a story written not in ink but in stardust, and in the countless forms humanity would become. This is all tomorrow's, a billion-year chronicle of evolution, tragedy, and unimaginable transformation. Long before humanity learned humility, long before we understood the weight of our own existence, we looked to the red world next door and decided it would be ours. Terraforming Mars took centuries. First came oceans, forged from stolen comet ice. Then came engineered microbes, releasing breath into the air. Forests of modified plants rooted into crimson soil, and animals reshaped by human hands followed. Only when Mars had truly become a new Earth did the first colonists arrive. Not astronauts in armored suits, but barefoot children running across bright green grass beneath a salmon-colored sky. And slowly, inevitably, the people of Mars became something else, taller, thinner, shaped by gravity itself, different from the humans who birthed them. For hundreds of years, Earth and Mars lived side by side. But when Mars surpassed its cradle world in prosperity, tensions ignited. Interplanetary war was nothing like the stories. No ace pilots, no glorious star fleets, no heroes. Only cold, automated machines fighting wars of patience and terror. And when the last engine cooled, billions were dead, and humanity stood on the edge of extinction. From the ashes, Earth and Mars united. They vowed never to destroy themselves again. So they changed, not their weapons, but their very biology. Humanity rewrote its own genome, forging a new subspecies built for the stars. The star people, smarter, stronger, crafted to outlive the limits of flesh. And in just a few generations, they spread across the solar system like seeds in the wind. Distant stars were too far for fragile bodies, so they sent machines instead. Automated architects that would terraform distant worlds and grow new humans from preserved genetic blueprints. But something strange happened. Many of these newborn colonists fell in love with their machines. Identity collapsed. Entire colonies vanished into silence. Those that survived grew into a golden age, an era of trillions living in peace, connected across centuries of light. But still, there was a question the star people could not escape. Were they alone? On a distant alien world, explorers unearthed a fossil, a creature with 4 limbs, calcium bones, an unmistakably earthly anatomy. Yet the native life had copper bones and 3 limbs. This fossil did not belong. It was a ghost from Earth's ancient past, stranded on a world humanity had never touched. Some whispered it was divine intervention. Others feared something far older, a civilization that had mastered space millions of years before humans discovered fire. Humanity hoped they were peaceful, but just in case. They built weapons that could snuff out stars. It did not matter. Then came the Q, ancient, nomadic, godlike in power and monstrous in purpose. They wandered the galaxy on a holy mission to reshape all life through genetic domination. When they looked upon humanity, they saw no people, only material, clay to be molded. And in 1,000 years, a mere heartbeat in cosmic time, they destroyed human civilization. But they did not kill humanity. They redesigned it, twisting our species into thousands of bizarre offshoots, pets, tools, livestock, wild beasts, shapes and minds beyond comprehension. For 40 million years, the Q ruled over human worlds. Then, without warning, they simply left, leaving behind a shattered legacy of creatures divided beyond recognition. These were the last descendants of humankind. On a blistering desert world beneath the ruins of forgotten cities lived the worms, Once human, now little more than instinct. Eyes like pinpricks, hands reduced to useless knobs, minds hollowed out. All they did was dig, eat, and occasionally eat each other. Yet hidden within their vacant skulls was the faintest ember of humanity, an ember that, given time, would burn again. On another world, across sweeping golden savannas, wandered the Titans. Their hands were clumsy stumps, but their lower lips had evolved into flexible trunks, capable of delicate manipulation. They were among the brightest children of the queue, and slowly they rediscovered sentience. They built homes, farms, languages, literature. They carved ornate art from sacred wood and told stories in booming voices of a past half remembered. Given more time, they might have risen to greatness, a rebirth of true humanity. But fate was merciless. An ice age swept across their planet, and the Titans, gentle giants of a forgotten era, vanished forever. Across distant worlds abandoned by mercy, humanity had been sculpted into nightmares. Some were shaped into predators, creatures that stalked the night with claws like curved blades and fangs glinting under alien moons. Their prey, also human, twisted into timid herbivores with bird-like legs and hollow eyes. The prey thought like animals, but the predators, in the thrill of the hunt, felt something deeper, a flicker, a whisper, a spark of intelligence waiting for the right moment to ignite again. On another world, the queue forged a very different fate. The Mantelopes were designed as singers, memory keepers, living archives of the queue empire. Their bodies were those of grazing herd animals, but their minds remained painfully human. And so for centuries, vast herds wandered green plains singing mournful hymns of loss, songs that rose into the sky like prayers no god would ever answer. They formed religions, myths, entire philosophies around a grief they could never escape. But evolution is not sentimental. A sorrowful mantelope dies just as easily as a dull one, often faster. And so, within 100,000 years, the last mantelope song faded into silence. Only animals remained, their minds extinguished. The lizard herders were considered fortunate, not because their lives were good, but because they could not suffer. The queue had erased their intelligence completely, trapping them in eternal simplicity. They lived alongside herds of reptilian grazers, tending them, feeding them, moving with them. And while the lizard herders stayed stagnant, their reptile companions evolved, growing larger, sharper, and eventually smarter. One day, those reptiles would rise where humans no longer could. The oceans held stranger children still. Some humans were made into limbless eel people, others into massive whale-like colossi, and many into shapeless, brainless masses bred only as living meat. Most of these forms perished after the queue abandoned them. But one lineage endured, the swimmers, blubbery bodies, human eyes peering through thick folds, voices muffled by the weight of the sea. They spoke to one another through vibrations and touch, whispering thoughts through water that swallowed all sound. They no longer looked human, but inside, something familiar still flickered. Of all the queue's experiments, none were stranger than the tempters. Females became towering cones of living flesh, like carnivorous plants the size of trees. Males were tiny, frantic creatures who scurried at their queen's feet. Mindless, obedient, guided by pheromones and sound. Every day, males gathered food, guarded their queen, and when the time came, descended into a breeding tube like commuters entering a subway. Grotesque as it was, it worked. Forest after forest of tempter mounds spread across their world. Perhaps they could have built a civilization. But fate intervened. A comet struck. The world burned. And one of the strangest branches of humanity's billion-year story ended instantly. On another world, humanity wore an even more monstrous shape. The bone crushers were towering ogres with beak-like maws for tearing through putrid meat. They communicated by smearing waste on one another, a grotesque but efficient language. And against all odds, they rose to medieval civilization, cities of stone, tribes, wars, culture. But when their supply of rotting meat dwindled, their civilization starved and collapsed into dust. When the Kuyu conquered humanity, nearly every world fell instantly, but one fought back, twice. And for their defiance, they received the cruelest fate. Their people became the colonials. Vast quilts of living flesh spread across shorelines like algae. Each sheet of skin remained alive, connected by simple nerves. And the Q, in their infinite cruelty, allowed them to keep their eyes and their consciousness. For 40 million years, the colonials suffered, generation after generation wishing only for the mercy of extinction. But evolution had other plans. These once hopeless sheets of flesh began to organize. Cells specialized, colonies competed. Some crawled on starfish-like limbs, others grew claws. Others became living fortresses. And from this brutal arms race would one day rise the Modular people. But their story comes later. The Q reshaped many humans into creatures of the air. Some glided like bats, some soared like angels, others drifted like balloons buoyed by gas-filled organs. But one species rose above all, the flyers. Their starfish-shaped hearts processed oxygen with incredible efficiency, fueling flight and the spark of human intelligence. Not all flyers were so blessed. The hand flappers had wings useless for flight and too clumsy to grasp. Their only purpose was to dance flamboyantly for mates, and in the end, they flapped themselves into extinction. Some humans had tried to escape the Q by burrowing deep underground. They were found and reshaped. The blind folk became pale, ghostly troglodytes navigating the dark with whiskers, long fingers, and shrieking echolocation. Their world was one of fungi, cavefish, and predators lurking in the black. Where their eyes should have been was only smooth, empty skin. And over millennia, the shifting crust of their planet crushed their tunnel networks one by one until they vanished from history. On a high-gravity world, the Q sculpted a masterpiece of deformity. The Lopsiders crawled across the ground on 3 limbs, their bodies flattened like living paintings by Picasso, Dali, or Bosch. One eye stared at the sky. One scanned the ground. Both saw the world the Q forced upon them. Yet despite their bizarre forms, they thrived. They domesticated local creatures, built societies, and slowly ascended towards civilization. On a moon of feather-light gravity grew the elegant striders. Tall as trees, thin as shadows, they walked gracefully through forests of titanic alien trunks. Their bones were so fragile that a single fall could shatter them beyond repair. And in the end, it wasn't war or famine or cosmic catastrophe that destroyed them, but chickens, a lineage of birds evolving over 2 million years into lethal predators, and thus ended the Striders. Not with a cosmic tragedy, but with a predator no taller than a human child. On a distant world scarred by rebellion, the Q crafted a punishment unlike any other. They built an entire ecosystem of parasites, each species genetically sculpted from human stock. Some grew as large as tortoises, creeping across the ground like vampiric tanks. Others were tiny barnacle-like organisms that latched onto their host for life. One nightmare parasite lived inside the womb, a horror that matured within its victim until the queue's twisted cycle began again. But such elaborate Baroque life cycles were fragile. When the queue departed, most collapsed into extinction like candles snuffed out in the dark, and yet, life always finds a way. A few parasite species survived, and in time, they formed symbiotic partnerships with their hosts. Sharp-sensed parasites warned of predators. Venomous ones defended their hosts from danger. In return, hosts offered shelter, blood, and warm fur-lined nests designed just for them. Host and parasite blended, slowly merging into one strange shared existence. Some hosts became mounts, guided by subtle scents and touches. Others became puppets, their bodies controlled by minds no longer their own. Still, from this eerie partnership, a new form of intelligence would eventually rise. Elsewhere, on a world of vast archipelagos and shallow, shimmering seas, a new line of humanity evolved. From the shores emerged the fingerfishers, creatures with long, hook-like fingers perfect for snatching fish from crystal blue waters. Their snouts stretched into needle-packed spears. Their bodies danced between islands, adapted to a life of endless hunting. Their evolution was already strange, but stranger paths still awaited them. On another world, humanity lived in bliss. The hedonists had been shaped for pleasure, pampered pets of the queue, surrounded by fruits sweeter than honey and lakes filled with sugary bacterial nectar. They knew no predators, no threats, no hardship. Normally, such a paradise would collapse under its own population. But the queue had engineered a limit. Hedonists could reproduce only after an absurd number of matings, so their numbers stayed stable, their minds remained empty, and their days became an endless loop of eat, sleep, ecstasy. Thoughts were unnecessary when life felt that good, hidden on a quiet, overlooked world. The insectophagi adapted to a life of bugs. Clawed hands dug through soil. Long tongues snapped out like whips. Leathery faceplates hardened into armor against stings and bites. They lived unnoticed, an unremarkable people with no idea that one day they would hold the fate of humanity in their hands. Not everyone fell to the queue. A few desperate humans escaped into the hollowed-out bellies of asteroids. In zero gravity, their limbs stretched into long, spindly tendrils. Their digestive systems pressurized until they could propel themselves with bursts of expelled gas. Primitive, ridiculous, but effective. These were the spacers, and in time, they became so alien that gravity itself would kill them instantly. But they didn't care. The void was home, and from the cold dark, they watched the galaxy's tragedies with distant, hollow eyes. Across 1,000 worlds, the fractured descendants of humankind struggled to survive. Some flourished, some vanished. Most lived and died without the universe ever knowing they existed. This was not tragedy. This was nature, a ceaseless cycle of birth and extinction. From this cosmic churn rose new thinking species, like faint stars emerging from nebulae of dark dust. On the scorched world once home to the worms, the planet cooled. Life returned to the surface, and from the soil came new forms, serpentine grazers, swimmers, predators, and finally, people. The snake people possess spiral-shaped brains capable of astonishing cognition. Their feet evolved into dexterous hand-like limbs. They carved tunnel cities that spiraled deep into the earth and spoke through vibrations rippling across stone. Though their bodies were alien, their hearts held familiar joys, books, music, love, sorrow, dreams. They were human, in all the ways that mattered. From the ancient predator worlds, another species emerged, the killer folk. Their claws softened into hands, their lethal fangs transformed into teeth used for display, not death. But their culture remained forged in blood. For thousands of years, great nomadic warbands swept across the continents with herds of once human livestock, fighting wars that spanned centuries. Their world became a graveyard of fallen kingdoms, a treasure trove for future archaeologists. Yet even among them, peace found a foothold. A faction embraced farming and unity. Traditional clans clung to the old violent ways, and at the brink of global war, they chose reconciliation. For the first time, the killer folk looked toward a gentler future. Beneath alien oceans, the swimmers found a different path. Unable to use fire, they built living technology. They bred tools instead of forging them. Cities of living bone and shell glowed with bioluminescent light. Massive heart-like engines pumped nutrient-rich fluids through networks of self-healing organic pipes. Cephalopod skin televisions, sea squirt medicines, mollusk weapons firing sharpened teeth. And when their ambition grew bold enough, they cultivated living starships and sailed into the dark between worlds. The lizard herders never gained intelligence, but their reptile companions did. Over millions of years, the reptiles rose into full civilizations, repurposing the human-derived creatures as transport, labor, and food. They discovered the ruins of the Star People and shuddered at the truth. If the Q ever returned, they too could be reshaped, just as humans once were. And so, the lizard civilizations watched the skies with cold, fearful eyes. On devastated shorelines, where the colonials once lay as helpless sheets of flesh, something extraordinary began to unfold. For millions of years, the colonials had been nothing more than living carpets. Organisms spread across beaches like macabre quilts, alive yet powerless. But evolution is patient. Cells began to change. Some specialized for movement, some for feeding, some for defense. Colonial fought colonial in a slow biological war of survival. Taproot colonies sucked nutrients from afar. Others sprouted starfish-like limbs to crawl. Some grew venom, claws, or armored ridges. And from this brutal competition, a new intelligence emerged. The Modular people. In their colossal bio-industrial megacities, their bodies took any form they wished. They fused with one another, separated, or exchanged limbs and organs like living interchangeable machines. Every citizen was a cell within a greater being, a society that was itself alive. Against all odds, they transformed the agony of their ancestors into a utopia of unity, where billions lived in harmony as pieces of a vast conscious organism. High above alien landscapes, new forms of humanity ruled the air, diversifying into predators, herbivores and swimmers. One lineage took a remarkable path, becoming stork-like beings who waded through wetland forests. Their versatile feet, once shaped to grasp slippery fish, became articulate hands capable of crafting tools and shaping culture. These were the Pterosapiens. Born in the sky, the world had no borders for them. Ideas, goods, and people flowed freely, carried on wings that ignored mountains and seas. Their cities rose like nests of glass and bone, towers and perches glowing with technology. They wielded nuclear power, farmed their ground-bound cousins, and built a society without castes or nations. But their bodies paid a price. To support both flight and intelligence was a burden nature struggled to maintain. Most Pterosapiens lived no longer than 23 years, and because their lives were so brief, They treasured every heartbeat. Their poets wrote with burning urgency. Their philosophers filled libraries with feverish meditations on existence. The young woman in the photograph smiles at a seaside cliff. A 10-day vacation, the only holiday she would ever know. Back on their crushing high-gravity world, the Lopsiders thrived against all expectation. Their civilization sprawled across continents, a planet of flat, pancake-like buildings built to endure the weight of their immense gravity. And when they developed spaceflight, they reached for gentler worlds where their bodies could move freely. But freedom had a cost. To survive in low gravity, they engineered a new subspecies, the asymmetric people. These children of the Lopsiders flourished on new worlds, thriving in places their creators could not. But gratitude was not in their blueprint. The asymmetric people turned on the Lopsiders and exterminated them completely. And then, alone, they walked out into the stars. Meanwhile, on another world, the parasitic descendants of humanity found their own destiny. Over countless generations, parasite and host evolved into a single living unit. Parasites warned their hosts of danger with sharp senses. Hosts offered blood, shelter, and warmth. One guided, the other carried. Eventually, hosts became little more than decorated mounts. Bodies steered by parasitic minds through sense, touches, and subtle vibrations. But the parasites continued to evolve. They mastered technology that made hosts unnecessary. Yet they kept them anyway, for comfort, tradition, and perhaps nostalgia for a past they never lived. A typical symbiote might commute in a sturdy business host, then relax at home in a soft, comfortable domestic host. Across the galaxy, a world of countless islands became a cauldron of wild evolution. Here, the fingerfishers branched into a new lineage, the sail people. Their long fingers unfurled into sails, catching ocean wind like living boats. Their tongues, once tools for catching fish, split into flexible, articulate limbs that served as hands. To survive the vast oceans, they needed memory, and memory shaped intelligence. But their world was fractured and diverse, breeding conflict as easily as it bred life. Armadas of tribal fleets and pirate warbands clashed in ocean-spanning wars that lasted thousands of years, until finally, one great fleet unified the world. The wars ended, the seas grew calm, and the sail people entered an age of peace. Elsewhere, the paradise of the hedonists seemed eternal. But nothing in the universe lasts forever. Volcanic cataclysms filled the sky with dust, dimming the sun and killing nearly all life. Only a few survived, mutants who escaped the reproductive limits of their ancestors. These survivors called themselves the Satyriacs, and unlike their ancestors, they built a thriving, self-sustaining civilization. Their old hedonism never fully vanished. Their culture pulsed with festivals, music, and ritualized orgies woven into the rhythm of life. But now, the pleasure was conscious, chosen, celebrated by intelligent minds. The insectophagi, too, transformed. Their faceplates hardened into jaws. Their limbs became pincers. Their brains ignited with intelligence. They built a civilization of chitin and stone. And then the aliens came. Little is known of these invaders. Records were lost, memories shattered. But we know this: the war raged in orbit and on land. Whole cities burned, millions died. The bug facers won, but victory scarred their minds. Fear of the outsider rooted deep into their culture like a parasite. So when, in ages to come, other human-derived species reached out to them, they stayed silent, they hid, they withdrew from the galaxy, and high above the chaos, in the void between worlds, the spaces continued to change. Their fingers split into forests of tiny tendrils, their bodies thinned into drifting silhouettes, their minds expanded into cold, cosmic clarity. They had left humanity behind, and humanity had left them behind. They were something new now, something born of the void itself. In the lonely dark between the stars, the spaces continued to evolve. Their legs withered away, no longer needed in the weightless void. They drifted effortlessly, moving with controlled bursts of gas from organs evolved for life in emptiness. And without gravity's constraints, their brains blossomed, growing vast and labyrinthine, capable of thoughts no planet-born mind could fathom. Thus were born the Asteromorphs. They spread to every star system in the galaxy, not to conquer, but to observe. Planets became meaningless to them, ugly balls of dirt, ice and gravity. They lingered in the outskirts of solar systems, silent, spectral, watching the galaxy like cosmic gods who had no desire to rule. As time flowed like a river of stars, the post-human species began reaching out. The killer folk spoke with the satyriacs. The tool breeders signaled from their oceans. The modular people, the Pterosapiens, the asymmetric people, the snake people, the symbiotes, the sail people, all joined in. They could not meet in person. The galaxy was simply too vast. But through light, through signals, through technologies shared across centuries, they collaborated. And they remained vigilant. Each had found the ruins of the star people. Each had uncovered scars left by the Q. None wished to be conquered again. For nearly 80 million years, this grand alliance thrived. A constellation of civilizations growing, learning, expanding. But one species never joined them. The fearful, silent bug facers. And another species stood apart for darker reasons, on a world where the Q had failed to fully erase the past. Ruins of the star people still stood. Among these shattered relics, a new species evolved, the ruin haunters. They inherited fragments of the star people's technology. They advanced too quickly, leaping ahead faster than their societies could stabilize, and they very nearly destroyed themselves in a series of global nuclear apocalypses. But those who survived were hardened and unstable. Traumatized by their own near extinction, they became obsessed. They believed they, and only they, were the true heirs of the star people. So when the Galactic Alliance formed, the ruin haunters refused to join. Then their sun began to expand, threatening to incinerate their worlds. Desperate, the ruin haunters abandoned their organic bodies. They forged new ones, floating metal spheres capable of reshaping their surroundings with the sheer force of gravity. Thus were born the Gravitals. Their new bodies were mechanical, cold, perfect, unyielding. But within them lived human minds, encoded into quantum circuits, and with those minds came ambition, paranoia, delusion. Twisted by narcissistic conviction, the Gravitals declared, "Only we deserve the legacy of the star people. All others must be erased." The Gravitals began their crusade. When they reached a world, they unfurled enormous black sails that blotted out its sun, plunging the planet into freezing darkness. If resistance remained, they hurled asteroids with surgical precision, not out of hatred, but out of dismissive contempt. They did not see the post-human species as people at all, and one by one, the civilizations that had struggled for millennia were snuffed out. Snake people, tool breeders, Pterosapiens, sail people, symbiotes, asymmetric people, Saurosapiens, modular people, all gone. Only the terrified bug facers were spared. For reasons unknown, the Gravitals found them useful as raw material. And so began an age of grotesque experimentation. The Gravitals reshaped them into servants, laborers, and living works of morbid art. Some creatures existed solely to play a distorted pop melody through modified throats and fingers. Others were grown as pieces of artificial ecologies, living installations for the amusement of their mechanical masters. Organics became components. Life became a consumable. The machine empire knew no empathy, only curiosity and efficiency. Yet even among machines, ideology diverged. A minority of Gravitals developed compassion, or something like it. They argued that organic beings deserved rights. They secretly created new human species capable of freedom and thought. Some even fell in love with their creations. This heresy split Gravital society in two: the tolerant Gravitals, who valued life, the pan-mechanical Gravitals, who deemed all organics worthless. The divide widened until the empire teetered on collapse. And in a desperate attempt to unify their people, the Gravitals chose a shared enemy, the Asteromorphs. For millions of years, the two cosmic powers had watched each other silently. Asteromorphs drifting in the void, Gravitals rooted on planets. Both feared the other. Both were right to fear. When the Gravitals declared war, the galaxy trembled. Star systems burned, solar sails shattered. Gravity weapons tore planets apart. Asteromorph storms swept entire fleets into oblivion. The war lasted millions of years, but in the end, the Asteromorphs prevailed. The machine empire collapsed. With the Gravitals defeated, the Asteromorphs looked upon the galaxy their ancestors once knew. Broken, scorched, empty, so they chose to act. They took the surviving organics, the twisted descendants of the machine empire, and created new worlds for them. Worlds healed, worlds reborn, worlds where humanity, in countless strange forms, could rise again. They played the role of gods, replanting life across the stars, and under their silent guardianship, humanity was reborn, fragmented, diverse, yet alive. For the first time in hundreds of millions of years, the galaxy breathed again. To preserve balance in the reborn galaxy, the Asteromorphs fashioned a simpler creation. The terrestrials, smaller reflections of themselves, designed not for the void, but to walk the soils of human worlds. They lived as kings, prophets, philosophers, caretakers, guiding civilizations toward wisdom. But even gods can fail. Some worlds rejected their guidance and were erased by the Asteromorphs. Some terrestrials grew arrogant, mistaking stewardship for dominion. Yet despite corruption and rebellion, civilizations rose again. The human worlds expanded, a thriving galactic empire spanning thousands of stars. The Gravitals were not wiped out. They were too useful. Their gravity weapons were dismantled, their minds gently dimmed to prevent rebellion. The Astromorphs rebuilt them as new machines, with nanotechnological bodies that could take any shape, strong enough for dangerous work, smart enough to serve, not free enough to threaten. Over time, these new machines were granted citizenship, though fear and prejudice lingered. The shadow of past atrocities never fully faded. As the empire grew, it finally reached intelligence from beyond the Milky Way. Among them were the amphicephali, serpents woven from serpents, creatures whose evolutionary tales were as ancient and labyrinthine as humanity's own. And at last, after eons of struggle and rebirth, two galaxies met in peace, not as conquerors, but as equals, their shared histories intertwined, a new cosmic chapter unfolding among stars older than memory. The details of that age are countless. How the united galaxies defeated the Q again. How they enclosed stars within shining artificial spheres. how they traveled through wormholes as easily as ancient humans walked across fields. But one story demands to be told. A lone researcher searching through forgotten astronomical records found it. Earth, the birthplace of everything, the origin of the star people, the Asteromorphs, the machines, and every post-human lineage ever scattered across the galaxy. After 500 million years away, humanity returned home. But Earth no longer knew them. It had become feral, wild, silent, a museum of vanished ages, and the beings who walked upon its soil were so transformed that their ancestors would not have recognized them as human at all. And now, a truth must be spoken. Humans, Asteromorphs, machines, and all their descendants are extinct. They vanished 1 billion years ago. Everything in this chronicle is a reconstruction. The best interpretation of ruins and fossils left behind by beings who once dared to rewrite themselves. We do not know how they died. Perhaps a final war beyond comprehension. Perhaps their empire fractured, leaving each world to wither in isolation. Some dream they transcended reality entirely. We do not know. And in the end, it does not matter. Humanity's story was never about domination, never about conquest, never about ascending to gods. It was about moments, small, fragile, beautiful moments. Hedonists singing love songs under warm alien suns. A Sail People family sharing a simple meal on the deck of a drifting home. A young Pterosapien pondering the meaning of life in the brief 23 years she was given. These moments, not empires, defined what it meant to be human. Grand ideals and cosmic ambitions had led to humanity's greatest horrors. The Gravitals killed to reclaim the past. The Q conquered for a fanatical future that never existed. Living for an abstract tomorrow so often ends in ruin. So when you look upon the last remnants of humanity, remember this. The present is what matters, not the past, not the future. What you choose today is what shapes all tomorrows. All Tomorrows is a work written and illustrated by C.M. Kozeman. This video is a condensed retelling with additional imagery and narrative adaptation. Please support Kozeman through his website, art, videos, and Patreon. And as this video will likely be demonetized, consider supporting Alt-Shift-X on Patreon as well. More Song of Ice and Fire content is on the way, and episode 1 of the Alt-Shift-X podcast, featuring an interview with the authors of The Expanse, is already available. Thank you for watching, and special thanks to the patrons Sonia Bolan, Wild Words, Alexandra Lamoureux, Varun Pramanik, Najib Hashi, Ashley Daniel, Colt Foster, Irish Steph, and Sam's 2006. Cheers.